Welcome to episode 9 of Broadcast Booth, stories inside the headsets of play-by-play. I'm Brian Jensen, the host of this program, and each week or each episode we try to have some of the great play-by-play voices from around the country, various sports, various levels. We've had national, we've had golf, we've had baseball, basketball, football, we've had college, we've had pro, and we've had Hall of Famers. As a matter of fact, it should be no surprise that I say that with the guest that we have on today. Our guest is Craig Way, who, of course, is the play-by-play voice of the University of Texas Athletics, but he's not just that. He's also the play-by-play voice of Texas high school football and much, much more, which we'll get into. Craig Way joining us on the program here. And, Craig, what a thrill to have you join us here on Broadcast Booth.
Thrill's mine, BJ. Great to be on with you, and I appreciate it. It's an awful lot of fun, and it's always great when we can all get together and talk, all of us who, cross paths during the course of an academic and athletic school year. So it's great to be on with you.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that because we had just seen each other last week prior to recording this episode at AT&T Stadium in Arlington, where the Big 12 had their media day, and that's something that we go to annually. And one of those places, like you mentioned, that the guys kind of get together.
Yeah, that's one of those signpost things, Brian, where when you see it, when that happens, you're getting a little closer to football season. I always say that the first signpost, the first mile marker, if you will, that you're drawing closer to the start of a football season is Big 12 football media days. And then after that, the Texas High School Coaches Association's annual coaching school and convention. Those two events are kind of signal events for me that we're drawing a little bit closer to football season. And it was great to see it. And I know you felt the same way. It was great that we were all able to get together again. Clearly that couldn't happen last year, but anytime we can all get together in a function like that, it's an awful lot of fun.
Well, and I've got to talk a little bit more about the Texas high school function that you mentioned, because that is such a passion of yours. Want to get into it a little bit. I've got one shot up for those that are watching this on YouTube. You see the stage that Craig was on. You had several sessions that you go through annual or every year. Talk a little bit about why you do that, what it is, and what is your most enjoyable event out of that.
Well, it's kind of an outgrowth, really, Brian. You've known me a long time, and you know that back in the mid-'80s when I was working at KRLD Radio, we started doing high school football, a game of the week. It was an outgrowth of doing a Friday night scoreboard show. And we did that from 11 o'clock at night on a Friday night to midnight, and we tried to cover all schools within about 150-mile radius of the radio station because of the big signal that we had at the station. So that program grew, and it grew in popularity and interest and things like that. And then Fox Sports Southwest took it in a statewide manner to television, and we started doing two different television programs. One was kind of a travel log show, High School Extra, where we got in one of those wrapped up vans and went all across the state and did features on schools and coaches and athletes and towns and things like that. And then we expanded it to doing the scoreboard show and then on to the state championships, like the picture that folks can see of Shay Walker, one of my broadcast partners on the state championship games. I started doing play-by-play of the state championships for the UIL in 1995 for Fox Southwest, back when it was still called Prime Sports. And so I've been doing that since 1995. Well, in conjunction with all of that, the Texas High School Coaches Association hosts its annual coaching school and convention. I've been going to it since 1985, in fact, and they used to have a high school all-star football and basketball game. They were very prestigious for many, many years when you didn't have quite as many entertainment options in the summertime. And they would have legends of the game like Bear Bryant and Darrell Royal and several other great coaches actually coached this game. And then later it was left for the high school coaches to coach the all-star football and basketball game. So we did those, and those were fun. But in addition to that, the Coaches Associations asked me to serve in a couple of functions for this annual coaching school and convention. What folks are seeing right there is a panel discussion that we do every year, and it involves all of the head coaches of all 12 Division I FBS programs. In other words, all the ones all the ones from the Big 12, the four: Texas Tech, Texas, TCU, and Baylor. And then, of course, in addition to those schools, SMU, and then in addition to that, Houston, Rice, all of the ones, Texas State, UTSA, every Division I FBS program in the state of Texas, their head coach is all up on that stage, all 12 of them. And we discuss a variety of topics, really. And it goes to things like this year we were talking about, obviously, name, image, and likeness. That's a hot button topic, dealing with a COVID pandemic with their programs. Other topics as well, the transfer portal, the restrictions on certain practices that the NCAA is implementing this year. So a variety of topics, and all of these coaches talk about and discuss these things. It's really kind of an eye-opening experience, because the perspective of some coaches is different, not only different from other coaches, but you can understand where their perspective is coming from, say, a Sonny Dykes at SMU, as opposed to a Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M, and their visions of the expansion of a college football playoff. So it's always a really intriguing event. And then there's the one other event they asked me to, or a couple other events. One is called a Head Coaching Academy, where they'll draw several hundred, most of them are pretty young guys, but they're coaches who want to become head coaches but aren't yet. They may be on a coaching staff as a coordinator or a position coach. And they have a variety of speakers who come in that range from superintendents to principals to athletic directors to coaches, to help try to prepare them to take that next step. How do you go through the job interview? How do you prepare to what job is a good one to go to, and which ones maybe you ought to think twice about? So that's a deal, and I MC that function. And then the one other is their most prestigious thing, the Hall of Honor banquet, where they induct coaches into their Hall of Fame, the Texas High School Coaches Association's Hall of Honor. So that's always a great assignment, so to speak, and a great experience to be a part of. So that's all part of that coaching school I really enjoy doing.
Well, it had to have been a great experience too. That's putting it lightly, I'm sure. The Hall of Fame and your selection. Tell me, just from someone that's obviously never been in that arena, what that experience must have felt like for you.
Well, it's a great deal of fun, Brian, and you're right. There are two main halls of fame in the state of Texas for as it relates to high school football. Now, there's the Texas Sports Hall of Fame in Waco, as we all know, and that's an unbelievable environment and a great selection process. I'm fortunate enough to be on the nominating committee for the candidates who come up for that every year, where you see names like Dirk Nowitzki and Emmitt Smith and all of those great players who were plying their trade in the state of Texas. And those are the guys that go into the Texas Sports Hall of Fame. There was a Texas High School Football Hall of Fame, and you made reference to that. And I was inducted into that in 2016, and it was a great experience. And I was going in with guys like Vince Young and Kevin Smith, the former Texas A&M and Dallas Cowboys DB, and other great former great high school players and coaches. And I kept saying one of these things is not like the other, but it was a great honor. I was glad to be a part of that. And then the deal last Saturday is the Texas High School Coaches Association's Hall of Honor. Only coaches are inducted at. Now, I have received the Distinguished Service Award from them, which is the highest honor they can bestow upon someone who's not a coach. So that's a great honor as well. But it's good to see these coaches get their due. Gerald Brents, I know you knew him, the outstanding coach at Plano, and won the 1994 state championship and came from that incredible Plano coaching tree that included John Clark and Tom Kimbrough. He was inducted last Saturday. Joey McGuire, who is on Dave Aranda's staff at Baylor University, won 3 state titles at Cedar Hill, and he went in as well. So it's great to see those guys experience a pinnacle moment like that, like it was last Saturday night.
So I think it's a lot of fun that, over the season, we have an opportunity to talk at least once each season, because Tech and Texas play. I do Texas Tech play-by-play. We mentioned you, of course, the voice of Texas athletics, including football. And you're also a radio host in the Austin area. So I appreciate this very much. You occasionally have me on the show to talk about Texas Tech football. But when we talk about those types of time frames, we're always talking about what's coming up that week, right? I mean, that's primarily what the purpose is. Let's get a scouting report of the team and the game and that kind of a thing. So one of the reasons that I'm doing this podcast and this show is because I want to have conversations about all that other stuff that isn't happening that week, because I think a lot of times we get so bogged down once the season starts in focusing on what we have to focus on, which, well, for you've got so many things going, so many irons in the fire, balls in the air, that you've got so much focus going on. So I'm curious, after you talked about the high school, you obviously have very, very passionate feelings about that. You're very passionate about the University of Texas and Longhorns athletics. So what is it that really gets your goat? What's the thing that really makes you excited? Which sport maybe? Is it having a new coach that you're now breaking in, which we've all had to do several times? Where is it that you just really get your fire going?
Brian, I think it's a couple of different things. With regard to high school football, it's a feeling of community. And you've seen it. You've been to those small towns. You've seen what the spirit is like in Salina on a Friday night, or Pilot Point, which is where, by the way, I cut my teeth when I was at North Texas and talked with station manager into letting us do high school football to help train sports broadcasters. And so my first assignment doing live play-by-play was Pilot Point in the early 80s. And then we expanded that to Louisville. And doing Louisville Fighting Farmer football, by the way, helped guys like George Dunham and Craig Miller of the Ticket cut their teeth on that. Mark Followell, play-by-play voice on television of the Dallas Mavericks. He's a former Louisville Fighting Farmer play-by-play voice. We kind of all went down that road, and it helped us expand our horizons a little bit. But the feeling of community is really important. I tell people, and I get asked this a lot, when folks say, what if I really want to get a good sense, a good feel for what high school football is all about in the state of Texas, where should I go? And I said, there's so many places you could go that would be emblematic of that. I mentioned Salina. Stephenville would be one of those places. Brownwood, which is a cradle of state championships under the immortal Gordon Wood. But you could go to so many places across the state. And it's not just at the one high school, smaller town level. Go to South Lake Carroll on a Friday night. You'll see how excited they are for that. And Allen, so it's
Midland, Odessa.
Yeah, absolutely. Go catch a Permian Midland League game. So you'll see all of that on display, no matter the level. And I think that's what makes it great, Brian. 16 million people a year attend a high school football game in some fashion in the state of Texas. So everybody feels drawn to it in some way, I think. Now, with regard to Texas, it's a different kind of feeling of community. You get to know and to respect and admire the head coaches and the athletic director and the athletic department staff. You meet all of those folks, and getting a chance to work closely with David Pierce, the baseball coach, Vic Schaefer, the Texas women's basketball coach, all the years I had with Mac Brown and Rick Barnes, great head coaches, and now these new exciting frontiers. I've had wonderful experiences early on visiting with Steve Sarkisian before he's even coached the football game. Same thing too with Chris Beard, the new head basketball coach. I knew Chris when he was a student coach, student assistant at Texas, and a manager back in the mid-'90s when he was there when Tom Penders was the head coach, and my broadcast partner on Longhorn basketball. My current broadcast partner, Eddie Orrin, was an assistant coach. Eddie and Chris are very, very close. So getting to reacquaint with some folks and getting to know new head coaches and hear their ideas and see their plan at work, it's a different kind of a feel of community, but it's one that draws me in nevertheless. Okay,
so I'm going to focus on Texas now a little bit and get behind the scenes of what your thoughts were, what your experiences were when some of these things were happening. Okay. And I'm going to show a clip or two because it is a podcast, and if we get, if it happens, it happens. I'm going to start with this one.
All All the dreams, all the hopes for the national championship come down to this play. Young from the shotgun, back to throw. Vince looks, under pressure. He'll tuck it in and run. Vince to the 5. Young, touchdown Texas. Touchdown Vince Young. He's done it again. Vince Young has given the Longhorns the lead with 19 seconds to play in the game.
Okay, wow is obviously the expression that anyone that was watching that, listening to that, and then every time that clip plays. What about you?
Well, I like to think of that as kind of being the incredulity of the moment.
Whoa. Spell that word.
Just say them. I don't spell them, a lot of times. You've been there, Brian. I mean, 3 years after that, you got a chance. We were both there in the same stadium to see Michael Crabtree make that tremendous catch and have Texas Tech pull off the win over a number 1 ranked Texas that denied them a probable shot at playing for another national title in 2008. So you've been in that arena. You know what it's like to be there in that moment, in a special moment where one play becomes, transcendent, so to speak, for a program or a student athlete. And in that particular case, it was the capper to a fabulous season. They'd been number 2 in the country behind USC all season long, and they got over the hump against Oklahoma. They'd lost 5 in a row to Oklahoma, and folks were saying, Matt Brown could not beat Bob Stoops, and they beat them handily that year, and they went on and won the national championship. But before they got to the national, they won the Big 12 title. And so they get into this game with USC, who'd won 34 in a row and defending national champions and all of this sort of stuff. And Texas had kind of had a quiet confidence about it during the whole of the week. But, those of us who were around the program knew they'd got a shot because if nobody else, number 10. I mean, Vince Young was one of those special transcendent players that wasn't going to allow a lot to beat him. And he did a tremendous thing or two in that football game, but it took some other things. You remember they had the big 4th down stop when Lendale White was stopped on 4th and 2. So in coming down the stretch, to address your question, that they had to convert a 4th down along that drive. And they're getting closer and closer. But as you
And that was
heard,
a 4th down.
Yeah, it was a 4th down and 5 at the 8-yard line. And for folks, I've had a lot of people say, wow, you were right on top. You must have had a great view of it. To be honest, completely honest, Brian, I had a terrible angle on the play. We were all the way at the other end of the stadium on the far north or northwest corner in the last booth is where they put the radio. So I'm leaning out of the window looking back down to call that play. That was leaning way out of the window to call that play. And it was just, but the funny thing is I was kind of used to it because I'd done it the year before when Texas beat Michigan in that same end zone on a walk-off field goal by Dusty Mangum. So I guess I was a little bit used to it by then.
Well, and that happens more often than people realize. The fact that we are supposed to be able to see every play, this is what the fan thinks, perfectly because we're supposedly in the best seat in the house. But typically more and more as the newer stadiums are being built too, this one obviously not one of the newer stadiums, but the ones that are the TCU Stadium, the AT&T Stadium, those types, the one in Washington, FedEx Field, those fields or those broadcast booths are being put in locations that are not your great locations because they're selling the heck out of the seats that are the great locations, as you can imagine, to try to make coin. Okay, let me ask you this quick question. When you made the call to say the game was won and over, where were you first looking? What did you look at first as the game wound down to the very end?
On the final play, when Leinart, when Leinart threw the ball downfield on the final play.
Yep, and the clock goes to 0.
Yeah, okay. My first thought was as he's scrambling out, he's rolling out of the pocket, he's being chased. And I actually said it in the call, time's going to run out on this play. So I'm saying it to the audience, but I'm also reinforcing it in my mind. He's either going to throw it downfield for a Hail Mary touchdown or Texas is going to win. I said, time's going to run out on this play. And he throws down. And I could tell he'd overthrown the target. It's overthrown, and that's it. The ball game's over. And this brings to mind, Brian, this age-old thing that fans and sometimes other media ask of us. And that's the deal about what did you plan to say in the moment? Yeah. And to be completely honest with you, I didn't plan anything in advance. I have always felt that if I tried to plan to say something, I either wouldn't execute it right or completely screw it up or whatever. I'd had a similar thing happen 3 years prior. In 2002, Texas was about to win the College World Series. It was my first year in the play-by-play chair for Longhorn baseball. Bill Schoening had left the prior November to take the job of the San Antonio Spurs. And in my first season, here's Texas about to win the national championship. Well, at the time, I'd had 2 or 3 people ask me, hey, what are you going to say if they win the national title? I'm like, I don't know. I can't. It wouldn't be right to try to plan something because I just wouldn't execute it right. Well, we get to the top of the 9th inning. South Carolina's down 6 runs, so we're feeling, pretty sure that Texas is going to win. Keith Moreland is my broadcast analyst. Keith had played on the 1975 national championship team at Texas, which coincidentally beat South Carolina to win the title. Keith brings it out of the break and says, here are the Longhorns 3 outs away, blah, 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 and Craig's going to take you home or something like that. At that point, Keith went down to the field to prepare to do post-game interviews. And so the first batter comes up for South Carolina and gets a base hit. And and it only briefly gone through my mind, hey, what will you say at the end? And I'd still kind of put it out of my mind. The next batter hits a comebacker to the mound. Houston Street was the Longhorn pitcher, and he was the outstanding player of that College World Series, went on to a great major league career. And he started a 1-4-3 double play. So now there's 2 quick outs. And it kind of went into my mind, oh, it's almost over. What are you going to say? So the only thing that I could think of that came into my mind was something Keith had said on my radio show the day before, that he always remembered when the plane came back in 1975, seeing the tower lit orange. So right at that moment, a ground ball's hit to first. Jeff Onivera scoops it up. And the first thing that came to my mind was to say, light the tower orange. The Texas Longhorns are college baseball's national champions. So I had so many people say, well, did you plan to say light the tower orange? And I was like, no, it's what happened. It's what came out. In fact, that's the name of my radio show, is Light the Tower.
I was going to say that.
Yeah, but I didn't plan that. And I didn't plan the Rose Bowl when I said a championship, 35 years in the waiting, 8 years in the building under Mac Brown. The Texas Longhorns are college football national champions. Again, I give an assist to Keith Moreland. He said right before the end of the game, he said, I didn't know if I'd live to see this. It's been 35 years. And again, it popped into my mind. I'm easily mentally swayed one way or the other. So that's why 35 years in the waiting, 8 years in the building under Mac Brown.
Well, okay, so I had a reason to ask you that question. When you finished the game, did you happen to look at the scoreboard as the game was winding down at the final second as it went to 0?
I might have given a quick glance, but I was still pretty much looking at the action on the field.
My daughter was there. She graduated from Texas. I don't know if I've told you that story. I might share that with you here in just a minute. But she took a quick snapshot. Take a look at this.
Oh!
That was on the scoreboard when the clock went to 0, and obviously whoever was running it immediately realized what they had done and switched it back to the correct, which is on your clip that I showed just a moment ago. But
wow.
Yeah, so she sends me obviously all the other great pictures of that event, and then she sends me this one. She goes, "You're not going to believe this." I was like, "Oh my gosh, got to get that one out there."
I'd never seen that, Brian. I think I might have heard something about it, but I'd never seen it. I know a lot of Longhorn fans made sport of this, the deal where after the Vince Young touchdown, remember Texas went for 2 afterwards, so they could go up by 3, and there was only 19 seconds left, but that was, so that USC would not be able to beat them on a field goal. If they got into field goal position, it would only tie the game. Well, when Vince Young, who had scored the touchdown, of course, then kept on the keeper on the try for 2 and got it, there was this well-celebrated shot, at least from a lot of Longhorn fans, of the USC palm squad behind the end zone. And you see one of them, the tallest one, holding their palms way up in the air like she's celebrating it. So a lot of folks had a lot of fun with that. That I recall. That I remember. I've not seen that Southern California BCS champions sign.
Well,
before.
I have to give credit to my daughter Mallory. Here's a picture of her in the booth at Texas. This was the 2015 Thanksgiving game, and I've got a story about why that game was important, as well as the other ones with her. And I think you'll get a kick out of this. At least I hope you do. So when she was a freshman back in 2002, she came to Lubbock to go to the Texas game, and she took the tickets that I was provided, and Tech won. So then they met again in the Big 12 basketball tournament. I gave her my tickets, and Tech won. And she told me then, she goes, "I will never take your tickets again." I said, "Okay, I understand that. I get it." Roll forward to 2008. So she calls me on Thursday, and she says, "My fiance and I are coming to Lubbock to go to the game." And I said, "Oh, you want my tickets?" She goes, No, I do not want the tickets. I will not take your tickets. I said, "Okay, I hope you find some." "Oh, we will. So I hung on to them because I knew what was going to happen. Friday night, 11 o'clock in my hotel room, phone rings. It's her. I said, "Absolutely, you can have the tickets." You know what happened. And Craig, I got to play this for you. This is the ringtone whenever she calls me.
Harrell in the shotgun. The throw goes to the right side for Crabtree. It's caught.
You're unbelievable.
He plays. Oh, he's the one. Red Raider. Unbelievable. Oh, Michael Crabtree has done it.
You're so unbelievable.
Oh, my God. Can you believe that? It is over. Red Raiders have defeated the #1 team in the country.
You're unbelievable.
Ruin on the field is confirmed. Yeah, baby. That's what I'm talking about.
You're unbelievable.
All right, so
he will talk with you.
well, and the funny thing is, so every time I answer the phone, I go, "Crabtree just scored again," and she goes, "Are you ever gonna let that go?" I go, "No, of course not. You guys have a national championship. Give me a break."
Yeah, the question for Mallory should be, Mallory, why didn't you ask for the tickets in 2004 when Texas was kind of struggling going in, and Vince Young, they weren't sure if he was going to continue to be the starting quarterback, and before the game, there's on the field warm-ups, and Mac Brown went up to him, and in those days, you'll remember, Brian, that Jones AT&T Stadium had the old rug, the old artificial turf rug, and Mac went up to Vince and said, "How you feel?" And he goes, "Coach, I feel great. This is just like what I played on in the Astrodome." And Mac said, I knew right at that moment he was going to be fine. He had a marvelous game. Texas won 51-21, and they went on to the Rose Bowl to play Michigan that year. And so the question for Mallory is, where were you in 2004 asking for tickets?
Well, guess what? In 2015 Thanksgiving game, once again, even though they were playing in Austin, she goes, "Hey, now that I'm an alum, I'm having a hard time getting tickets." So, when she's a student, she didn't. Now she's like, I can't believe I'm asking you this. And I go, "Okay, sure." And I'll be darned if we didn't win that one again. And I promise you, Craig, we are undefeated when I give her my tickets, and she swears now she'll never take them again. And I believe her this time. So
that's amazing. That's quite a stat.
Well, you have to go with what you got to go with. So that's what we have, and I'm going to stick with it. Okay, let's move topics a little bit. You do all of these different things that we've talked about. You do high school football, the shows, the scoreboard shows, the coaches' activities, the baseball, basketball, women's basketball, football for Texas, and your radio show. How in the heck, and I think I know this because I think I know one experience that you shared with us in the booth in Lubbock one time. There have to be major conflicts that go on in the scheduling of these activities when the seasons start overlapping. How do you handle that? How do you deal with that?
Well, I think that I've learned in 20 years of doing the Texas play-by-play that you can only take so many risks and so many chances, so to speak. And for example, I'll do the high school scoreboard live show at midnight on Friday nights, or 11 at night to 1 in the morning on what used to be Fox Sports Southwest, is now Bally's Sports Southwest. and then I'll go to wherever Texas is playing on Saturday. My caveat to that is it needs to either be in the state of Texas and or a night game and or just one plane flight, say out of DFW. If I've got to connect somewhere, I'm not going to run the risk on that. So if there's a game, say in Lawrence, Kansas, and I've got to fly to Kansas City and drive over, I'll probably pass on doing the show on that particular week. Obviously, I would pass on doing the show when they play at West Virginia or Iowa State, those kinds of things. It's just too problematic to make it work. But there are times when it becomes necessary to do some things. And one of those experiences happened in the aforementioned 2002 game that Tech won in Lubbock over Texas. Texas basketball was playing the night before at Madison Square Garden against Georgia. The Longhorns were going to be one of the favorites in the country in basketball that year, and in fact, they went to the Final Four that year. They had the National Player of the Year in TJ Ford. So I really needed to be there for that game. Now, the Tech-Texas game, if you'll recall, had a 2:30 kickoff that afternoon,
right.
On Saturday afternoon. So I looked at the plane flights and all of this, and there was a flight. If I left LaGuardia by 6 o'clock Saturday morning, I'd get to DFW by 8. And there was the connecting flight to go to Lubbock was at 10 a.m. So, or 9:50. So I thought, I've got plenty of time, should work. I checked the weather, always check the weather forecast. Everything looked clear and all that. So I go to Lubbock and I do the game. Excuse me, I go to New York. I do the basketball game. Texas wins the game. Next morning, I'm on the 6 a.m. flight out of LaGuardia. Everything's fine. I fall asleep. And I wake up when we're getting close to landing, and I'm thinking, okay. And then the pilot comes on board, and the captain says, "Yeah, we had to go around some storms, and that's what's making us delayed getting in the DFW." And I'm delayed, and I look at my watch back then, and I see that it's 9:15 at the time, and we're still in the air. So now I'm concerned. Well, it landed at about 9:35. Or 9:40. I get off the plane, I race off, I run just crazy through the airport, and I miss the flight to Lubbock by like 5 minutes. I mean, it had backed away. So there were no more connecting flights. There was going to be one over out of Love Field on Southwest, but it wasn't going to leave. By the time it would get me there, it'd be pretty close to kickoff. So, and then what flashed in my mind was something. There have been a couple of guys, big Longhorn fans, who were flying back on that same flight with me, and they said to me in the gate area, "Hey, by the way, we're taking a private plane out of Love Field out to Lubbock for the game if you want to join us." And I said, "Well, I appreciate it. I'm all set. I got a car waiting for me, so on and so forth." So when that happened, I did have a cell phone with me, and I did call, and I got a hold of one of them, and I said, "Hey, is that offer still open?" They said, "If you can get to Love Field in 15, 20 minutes, we'll wait on you." So I jump into a cab, and I said, "I've got to get to Love Field. I've got to get to whatever it was, Millionaire or one of the private charter terminal deals." And I said, "If you can get me there within 15 to 20 minutes, I will give you $50 extra." He got me there, and I gave it to him, and I got on the plane, and I landed, and I got up to the booth in plenty of time because of that, because it went straight out there, and I got out there in plenty of time. So that was a close call. The one that always kind of sticks with me after all these years was a basketball, and it happened the same year. It happened about 2 months later, in January. Texas was playing Nebraska. Nebraska, of course, was in the Big 12 back then, and they're playing in Lincoln, and they have a tip-off at 12:47 p.m. to be exact, because there was a Big 12 pregame show from 12:30 to 12:45 on TV on the Phillips 66 network, and then the game would tip off at 12:47. Well, I'm not going to mess around with anything. I'm going up Friday. I'm not going to, but I was flying commercial day, and I had my engineer with me, and I had Eddie Orrin with me. So we take off from Austin. We get to DFW, and we're delayed Friday night, and there was some concern about whether we could take off. Then they said, no, you're good. You can get off. So we take off about close to 10 o'clock Friday night. So we're going, and we're on final approach to Omaha. We have to fly into Omaha, which is an hour, as you know, east of Lincoln. We're on final approach, and we're still on final, where it seems like we're gliding a long time. And all of a sudden, I turned to Eddie and I said, we're not landing. And I can feel us kind of pulling up. And the pilot comes on and says, folks, here's the deal. There's right now, there's snow there in Omaha and all of this sort of stuff. And at the airport, they have various conditions for runways going all the way from excellent to unsafe. The runway in Omaha right now is poor. He said, now, at American Airlines, we can land on a poor runway. But with falling snow and a 22-mile-an-hour crosswind, I'm just not willing to take that risk. And we're all like, we agree with you. He said, we'll figure out something. We'll either go on to Minneapolis or we'll go back to DFW. I thought, oh, my goodness, don't go back to DFW. Well, a few minutes later, I feel the plane pulling away, and I said, Daddy, we're going back to DFW. Sure enough, they take us all the way back to DFW. Wow. We go to one of the airport hotels there, grab about 3-4 hours sleep, come back to get on the plane, and it doesn't take off till about 9:45 a.m. Wow. We land just past 11. And again, this is normally an hour drive, and the game's going to tip at 12:47. And we go running down to the baggage claim because we've got to get the broadcast equipment. One problem, the equipment didn't make it. Oh. So they said it'll probably come on the next flight. So we all look at each other, and I said to my engineer, he said, I need to stay. I can't not be here when the equipment arrives. I said, you stay. Eddie, let's go. I jump in the rent car, and we just take off with no equipment, and we're zooming down Interstate 80, the 58 miles or whatever it is, from Omaha to Lincoln. I called Scott McConnell, who was and still is the basketball media relations director for Texas. Does a great job. And I said, Scott, here's our situation. I explained it, and he goes, don't even bother with it, Craig. Just don't even come here. I said, what do you mean, Doc? I've come this far. I'm not going to not come now. I said, here's what I need. I need to get into the back parking lot right by the loading dock where I can come racing in, and I need a touch-tone telephone at our broadcast position. That's all I need. I said, can you help with that? He says, yeah, we'll have that. So I go wheeling in, and the guard at the gate, I explained to him, and he says, go on through, and we go right back to the loading dock. We jump out of the car. And by the way, as I'm pulling into Lincoln, I'm listening, and I became friends with him later, the Nebraska basketball play-by-play voice at the time, said, well, I'm looking over at the Texas broadcast position. It's empty, and, Dave, that's what happens when you try to fly in day of the game. I'm thinking, you don't even know what I'm doing. So we go racing around, and we pull in. I leap out of the car. The snow is like, almost it's calf deep, and I'm running in a suit through that. And I put myself up on the loading dock. I go running in through the loading dock, and I'll never forget it, Brian, going in and running into the arena because I knew by then I was going to miss tip-off. I go running into the arena, and I can still see it today, up on the scoreboard, Nebraska 7, Texas 4, 17:33 to go first half. So I race to the – meanwhile, our radio network had enlisted Keith Moreland back home in Austin to kind of describe what was going on by phone.
Wow, that's ahead of the curve. That's what everyone did in the pandemic, and he's ahead of the curve.
So I get there, I dial it up, I turn it around, turn the phone around like a stick microphone, and did the basketball game like this, Eddie and I, the entire game. And when Rick Barnes came over to do the post game, he'd been made aware of what happened with us. And so he comes over to do the post game, and I said, well, Rick, and Texas had to come from behind to win that game. And I said, there's the old thing about, persevering, and I know your team had to do it. I said, heck, we even had to just to get here, but your team really did persevere to get this win. And I hand him the phone, and he takes the phone from me, and he goes, I'll get to the game in a minute. But the first thing I got to say is, you two look awful. You look like you've been up. So that always sticks in my mind about travel issues. That's the only time I've had something happen where I actually missed the start of a game because of something like that.
Well, it's funny because, we all deal with travel in a little bit different way, I think. So I travel, those of you that don't know my situation, I live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and TxTech is in Lubbock, Texas, which is 360 so miles away. So my choice is to always go in on Friday whenever possible, which so far it's been almost every time, except when I went to a World Series game with my son for the Rangers, and that was on a Friday night. We decided I think it was an 11 o'clock start the next morning. We decided we were going to drive overnight, and so we did that, but I had to help because he drove with me. But it's interesting because you're so right in that you try to put whatever caveat you can in there to help you in case something goes awry. And the reason I go in on Fridays is because if there is weather or something like that, I can drive overnight or drive in the morning if it's a later game, whatever, to be able to get there. But then when you travel with the team, which we do as well, at times, then at least if something goes wrong, it goes wrong for everybody, right? But here's the funny thing coming out of your stories. So the story about the jet, about the private jet, it changed a little bit in the booth at the other end of the stadium in Lubbock. So you told that story, or we heard it as you were coming in, but the story turned out to be, Craig Way, man, he works for the University of Texas. He's flying private jets from Austin to Manhattan, and then he's going from Manhattan in New York. He's flying straight to Lubbock so he can make the game in time, and it sounded so great. So I tell you that because when we were in Oklahoma this year to go to the Oklahoma State game, with the pandemic and everything, travel on the road even was tough if you didn't have a car. They would not let us rent cars on the road. So we had to come up with rides. So this is what our producer engineer Steve Pitts came up with. And those of you that aren't watching, I had this on an earlier episode. We took a limo to Stillwater, and it was one of the greatest rides that we'd had. As you can see, John Harris, my color analyst, who, as you know him very well, 6'9", has a little bit of height there, had to kind of figure out which seat he was going to sit in, not quite the way he wanted to probably. And then I figured, we ought to make a little fun out of this. So we turned into, we figured we were a group that was headed to some concert or something. I mean, we had a lot of fun with it. And, it's just some of those experiences and memories that you have on the road, right?
Oh yeah, that's great. And I've had a couple of situations similar to what you said. The same fan who gave me the ride from Love Field to Lubbock did a similar thing for me. I was in Palo Alto to do a game between Texas and Stanford in baseball. Texas, I think, was number 2 in the country. Stanford was number 7 in the country. And I'd done a Friday night game. I'd done a red eye out of San Francisco, landed at DFW, connected, and went to Lubbock to do an Saturday afternoon basketball game between Texas and Tech. And I was going to, fly back afterwards, maybe even in early the next morning, and then stay in a hotel near DFW, and then go back out and then get there in time for the ball game. Well, when this fan heard about this, he said, no. He goes, let's change it. Get the university's travel agent to change your ticket. Can you get back Saturday night? And I said, yeah, but I can't possibly make the connection. He said, you can if you fly with me. So I had them change my ticket, and I came in on the Red Island late overnight Friday into Saturday morning, and then made it to United Supermarkets Arena, did the basketball game. Game ended, and I went with him. I was wrapping up my post game as quickly as I could, and so because he was ready to go, and I get on his plane with him. We fly into Addison Airport. He had his driver take me to DFW, and I got on a flight to San Francisco just in time. I was back in Palo Alto by 11 o'clock that night. So, the kind of friends and strangers makes a difference.
Well, that's true. That's true. In the early days, the Mike Leach era, when I was doing play-by-play at that time, my spotter was a student at Texas Tech, and his father was a very big donor, and he took me home from the games on Saturday nights on occasion on his private jet. So I know exactly what you're talking about. It is a nice little perk when it does happen. So now tell me,
the other side of that,
go ahead.
Brian, is 2003 to finish that crazy 2002-2003 season. Not only did the Longhorn men make the Final Four, the Texas women made the Final Four as well. And as you mentioned, I do their games as well when they don't conflict with the men's games. I think out of the Texas women's 35 games this past season, they made it to the Elite Eight. I think I did 28 of them, something like that. And I have, a backup if I have a head-to-head conflict with the men. But they were both in the Final Four. The men were in New Orleans. The women were in Atlanta. So the men had Saturday night game. I do the game. They lose to Carmelo Anthony in Syracuse in the national semifinal round. And then my best friend and I had a rent car, and he said, I'll drive so you can sleep. I thought, well, I'm wired now. I'm not gonna sleep. We drive overnight from New Orleans to Atlanta to call the women's semifinal game against UConn, or they almost upset Diana Taurasi and UConn in the semifinal, lost by 2 points in the semifinal. And then I flew home with the women's team after that. So you're right. It's different arrangements depending on the game, the time, and the circumstances.
Well, and it's different experiences too once the games start, because you never know what's going to happen. And I think that's one of the greatest things about doing play-by-play, the ad-lib portion of it. You never know what's going to be in front of you, so you are flying by the seat of your pants most of the time. You're prepared without a doubt, but what actually happens rarely is what is scripted. I got to believe that one of the greatest games that you recall calling was this
on
one.
to try a 40-yard field goal out of the hold of Cade McCrary. The final play of the rivalry. Good snap and hold. Tucker's kick is up. Justin's kick is good! It's good! And the Texas Longhorns have won the final rivalry matchup with Texas A&M. Justin Tucker drives it home, and one last time, the Texas Longhorns break the hearts of the Aggies of Texas A&M.
Okay, another great game, great ending, great call, and just because of the scenario, that had to be one that stuck with you for a long time.
It did, and it was kind of wistful. I think a little bit sad because of, but it's a great rivalry, and we know all the machinations that brought about the fact that the two don't play in football. Now they've gotten to the point where they're playing in other sports. They play annually in baseball. They play almost annually in women's basketball, and they played a little bit more regularly in men's basketball. And so that's been good to see. But it was kind of sad. And that's why you heard me say the final. And that was another thing, Brian, that came to me in the moment as they're lining up, and Cade McCurry's ready to hold for Tucker's kick, and it just popped in my head to say the final play of the rivalry, because this is it. One way or the other, either A&M's going to win or Texas is going to win, but it's going to come down to the final play of the rivalry. And Justin Tucker was amazing. The other thing that was amazing about that final drive is you had Case McCoy, Colts, much less heralded younger brother, had been on again, off again starter, leading that final drive. And he kind of had to, on one last run, just kind of pinballed his way through the Aggie defense and bounced off and got turned around and all this stuff, but it picked up a gigantic first down. And all the coaches are screaming, get down, get down. They didn't want him to have the ball stripped from his grasp there before Tucker kicked the field goal. It was a chilly night on Thanksgiving night, and certainly a memorable one.
Well, and one of the things I think, too, about that call and about field goal calls in general, to me, they can be some of the hardest calls to make different, make unique, because you basically you're setting it up. It's a very slow setup, and then the ball is in the air, and you're basically saying almost the same thing every time. You're holding your breath to see whether it's good or not, because, again, you may be in a bad angle to figure out whether it goes through the uprights or not. You may be waiting for the officials to actually signal that it's good or not, and then a lot of times the call is just good. but the way that you were able to fire that out there and just carry it the way you did, that's one of my favorite field goal calls of all time. I love that one. So,
well, Brian, you kind of made me think of something here, because I know you've been in this situation, calling a field goal from the radio broadcast position at AT&T Stadium.
Oh,
and from the altitude that we're working there at Jerry World, what it's like. We're on that kind of corner. And in the 2009 Big 12 championship game, Texas was this substantial favorite over Nebraska. They were undefeated. They were number 2 in the country behind Alabama, so they need to win this game to go to the BCS National Championship. And they had a really difficult time. And Ndamukong Suh had an unbelievable game. He just was in Colt McCoy's face the whole night. And it came down to that final drive, and they hit a big pass to Jordan Shipley to get them down the field. And then Colt, on a rollout, rolls to the right, and time almost ran out. He got rid of the ball, and it skipped out of bounds with, to be honest, less than a second left on the clock. Nebraska players were on the field because the clock went to 0. They thought they'd won, and there was actually time when they reviewed it. They put time back on the field, on the clock. Hunter Lawrence comes out to kick that field goal. Now, he's kicking toward us, but we're kind of at an angle, and you know what that angle's like with that goalpost is there. And I'm watching it very, very carefully. In fact, I just shot a quick glance down to our parabolic mic operator, because he'd always been kind of also a good signaler for me. In the Michigan Rose Bowl, when Dusty Mangum got it, I watched him all the way at the other end raise his arms up. So I'm going off of him, and I see him start to get excited when I call good on Hunter Lawrence's field goal. Footnote to that, Brian, I knew the clock operator. He'd been an ex-football official who was working that night and was with the timing crew. And I just said, some ending, honey. He said, Craig, you know exactly how much time was left on the clock when McCoy's pass skipped out of bounds? And I said, well, I figured there was a second. He said, well, remember, in the booth, we also keep it tracked in terms of tenths and hundredths of seconds. This is how we knew there was enough time left on the clock. When it skipped out on the internal clock in there, it was 0.39 seconds, just under 0.4 of a second, which, by the way, in basketball, as we know, that's enough time for a catch and shoot. So 0.39 was the actual time that was left on the clock when it skipped out of bounds, setting it up for the field goal. But as you know, Brian, trying to call a field goal from that angle can be a dicey proposition.
Well, and a lot of times you're watching that humongous screen. Because because you can't. That's what I do with the yardage markers at times when they're down at that end of the field. Because almost every call at that point is they're at about the 17, they're at about the 6. But if you glance up real quickly to that humongous screen, hopefully they have the camera on the angle that you're hoping for, and you can actually call the yardage line, or again, if the ball goes through, those types of things. But the field goal calls that you have done have been fabulous, and I know every play-by-play guy that does baseball just longs for the walk-off, and this was one of the greatest.
First pitch from Lamson. Swung on and a ball hit well. Out toward left. Back to the warning track. It is gone. It's gone. It's a walk-off. It's a walk-off home run to the National Championship Series. Cutter Rowe has left the yard, and the Longhorns will go to the National Championship on Monday night.
Now, that was 10 years ago. Great call. You just got back from there. And, an experience, again, this is one of the things that I'd love for you to share with everybody from a play-by-play perspective in all the different sports. You've basically been able to call national title games in all of them?
A Final Four semifinal for the women.
Oh, there you go.
National, and a Final Four semifinal for the men, and then national championships in football and baseball. And that was a unique situation there, Brian. That was 2009, and the Longhorns had a really good team that year, but they got through and they'd beaten Arizona State earlier in the tournament. Mike Leake, the future major league pitcher, had a 6-0 lead, I think, in like the 5th inning of their first meeting, and Texas comes back and wins like 10-6. And I was talking about this, by the way, with a guy you know very well, the play-by-play voice of Arizona State, Tim Healy, who was a former sports anchor at Channel 4 in the Metroplex.
Right.
And Tim and I were just talking about this because Texas played Arizona State in the regional here a little over a month ago. And then they met again in that game that you just showed the clip from. Well, Arizona State had a 3-2 lead going to the bottom of the ninth inning. And it started off with Cameron Rupp hitting a home run, and he hit a missile. It went out over dead center, straight down into the smoke, disappeared into the smoke of the barbecue pits. And I said, a prodigious clout is what I'd said on that one. And I've had a lot of fans always give me some good-natured grief and talk about prodigious clout since then. And so
Do you have a radio show called Prodigious Clout yet?
Not yet.
Okay. Maybe a podcast is in the works.
Yeah. So then, as you saw, there were 2 outs when Connor Rowe stepped to the plate. So it had gone out, home run, out, and then Rowe comes up. Well, Connor, great kid, was not a prolific home run hitter. Youngster out of Georgetown, just north of Austin, and great defensive outfielder, tremendous defensive out, but not really known for his bat. It comes to play, and you could tell he just barely got that one out, but he got it out. And so, again, the incredulity of the moment, kind of takes over there when they win on the walk-off to get to the national championship.
Fantastic stuff. Craig, listen, this has been a super, super time. I really have enjoyed it. We could talk forever. Well, typically when we see each other, we have great conversation, and it's nothing but add to this. And I really appreciate you sharing some of these great stories from behind the mic, inside the headset, all those great things.
Well, and as you know, Brian, inside our heads as well, the way some of this goes. So I look forward to seeing you this fall when Texas and Texas Tech get together again this coming season. So I'm looking forward to that, and it's always great to see you and visit with you.
Yeah, Big 12 opener this year. That's something unusual. Yeah, that'll be great. All right, I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Craig Way, Hall of Fame play-by-play guy from, as we mentioned, Texas high school football, University of Texas athletics, and has done so many other great things throughout his career. What a great thrill and honor to have him on the program today. Reminder now for everyone that is watching this on YouTube, you can also get us through other social medias. And for those of you that are listening on our podcasts, be sure to tune into some of these YouTube programs if you would, because you'll be able to see some of the images that have been talked about on the podcast. If you're watching on YouTube and you'd prefer to listen to these or would like to at some point going forward, you can get them at just about any of your subscription services for your podcasts. Appreciate everyone's time for this one and look forward to the next episode of Broadcast Booth.